And I'm gonna pass it over to Lauren.
Hi everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day so far, and I'm excited to see everyone. So I'm Lauren, and I'm going to be leading us through some affirmations before our discussion to kind of get us all in a good headspace and a good learning environment. So I'm going to read each one twice, and on the second reading, I encourage you to say it along with me to yourself or in your head. And you can feel free to stay muted or unmute, up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with. So I feel calm and prepared. I feel calm and prepared. Okay. I am ready to put forth my own ideas and react positively to the ones which might challenge me and my current worldview. I am ready to put forth my own ideas and react positively to the ones which might challenge me and my current worldview. I know that my community members support my learning alongside their own. I know that my community members support my learning alongside their own. I welcome this learning with an open mind and an open heart. I welcome this learning with an open mind and open heart. So that's it. Thank you everyone for doing that with me. And I'm going to pass it off to Ellen to get started on introductions.
Hi, I'm Ellen. Thank you, Lauren. That was beautiful. We are gonna go around now and say our names, our preferred pronouns, and then as an icebreaker, if you want to share where or when you feel the most at home. And then you can like popcorn it to someone else once you give your answer. Okay, I will start. My name is Ellen. I use they, she pronouns, and I feel most at home when I'm with my family. I'm really close to my family, and I don't know, I feel like no matter where we go, as long as like we're all together, I just feel really close and like secure. And also when I'm with my roommates, like playing games, specifically when we play Just Dance, I feel so loved and I just have so much fun. Okay. I'm gonna popcorn it to Audrey.
Hey guys, I'm Audrey. I use she, her pronouns. I feel most at home probably when I'm at home, when I'm in like my childhood bedroom, just because I'm comfortable with it and I feel really safe. Kind of like Ellen was saying, I feel secure with my family. So yeah, I'm gonna popcorn it to Bryn.
Hi, my name is Bryn and I use he, they pronouns. I would say I feel most at home with my partner. We're just really close and I feel like wherever we are together, it's just like home. And bonus mention to my cat because he's epic. I'm gonna popcorn it to Moko.
Hi, I'm Morgan, aka Moko. I use she, her pronouns. I would say where or when I feel most at home, definitely like with my friends. I feel very safe and supportive when I'm like with uh with my friends. And I feel like wherever we are, we just have a fun together and it's amazing. Um I'm gonna popcorn it to Aaron.
All right. Well, while Aaron's doing the thing, I will go. Hi, my name is Douglas. I use he, him pronouns. Um, and I feel most at home sitting at Mirror Lake with my white headphones on, reading a book, or with my iPad out. And now I'm going to popcorn it to Charles.
Hi everyone. I'm currently in my bed. But I use he, him pronouns and my name is Charles. I would say I feel most at home when I am going for a run in Forest Park, which is a giant park in St. Louis, and it is everything to me. And let me popcorn it to Finn. Finn, I think you're muted or we can't hear you.
Sorry, I had you guys plugged into my speaker. You guys can hear me now? Yes? Okay, cool. I'm Finn. I use they, he pronouns, and I would say I feel most at home when I'm at Cafe Kerouac, which I go to like every day. So yeah. And I am going to popcorn it to Amy. I don't think you've gone yet.
Hi guys, I'm Amy. I use she, her pronouns, and I would say I feel the most at home when I'm with my little sister and or my cat. But I will popcorn it to Lauren. I don't think you went yet.
I have not. No, I'm Lauren. I'm a Hardcover Hotties admin. I use she, her pronouns. I feel most at home at my parents' home. That one's true. And with my friends also. I'm gonna copycat Morgan on that one, but it's just so true always. And the last one is in my bed. I love my bed so much. It's so comfortable. It's yellow and I love yellow. So yeah, I'm going to popcorn it to Stephanie.
Hey everybody. Real quickly, I'm just gonna read Erin's response out loud for her. But it says, "Hi, I'm Erin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Berlin, RN, and it's 11 p.m., so I may not be here too long. Sad face. I feel most at home with my roommates, taking trips to graders and playing music." Thank you, Erin, for the commitment. Of course, Hardcover Hotties is hashtag worldwide. Greetings from America. Shout out Berlin. Okay, so my name is Stephanie, also Hardcover Hotties admin. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm so excited for this meeting. And I'm here sharing the screen with.
Hi, I'm Nia. I use they, she pronouns, and also excited to be here. I feel most at home either sitting in grass or hanging out with my friends, or also gonna steal Lauren's answer in my bed.
Yeah, I realized I just forgot to say where I feel most at home, and it is also in my bed, or sharing like a meal with like my friends and family makes me feel so like comforted. And I don't know, like certain types of restaurants or certain like cuisines just like feel like more at home. And yeah, I feel like a sunny day anywhere could also convince me that like I belong there. I'm always like, oh, this is the best place ever. And it's just because I happen to be there when like the sun is out. So
thank you, Bren, also.
oh, yay, yeah, awesome piercing alert. I'm going to popcorn it to D if you are able to speak right now.
Hey, can y'all hear me? It's D, they, she pronouns. I definitely feel most at home in my girlfriend's arms. She's back and like it's really been hitting, just holding each other, but also kind of what Stephanie said too, like when I'm in the kitchen with like people I love, making food for people I care about. I don't know. That's just like that's home. Has everybody else gone, or should I popcorn it to somebody?
I think that would be just about everybody. If I'm wrong, please shout yourself out.
Okay. Wait, sorry. What was that?
Oh, I think everybody is gone.
Okay, cool. I'll mute.
Thank you for sharing, Dee. So now very excited to lead the group into our discussion of Conditional Citizens. So this was a book that we've been like really excited about, and I feel like right away we're like able to like identify like so many connections with like past Hardcover Hotties books. The one that came to mind like right away was Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio, and Saigon by Phuc Tran, Year of the Tiger. Like lots of connections to that. So I'm sure that we can make many more as we continue our discussion. But just starting off, I wanted to add a few questions in the chat that you guys can think about. If one of the other admin could type it in right now while I say the first one. But I wanted to just start us off thinking about the title, Conditional Citizens, and if there was anything about that like really like stood out to you, or like what comes in mind when you think of like that phrase. Also welcoming just general thoughts about like the book as well, like to start us off.
I really liked it. I thought it was a really good book, and I think it's one of the favorites of mine that I've read with Hardcover Hotties so far. I thought that her writing style was really good, and I liked the way that the book was formatted and the different like almost like essay entries of the different subjects. And I also thought that it was really relevant, and it was neat to read a book that was written like not so long ago.
I think so, like the title Conditional Americans, like usually when I think of like the word conditional, it's related to like love, I guess, or like, or that concept. So I think it was interesting to have it like applied more obviously politically, and I think like, so I guess it seems, let me find my wording. Like it, to me, it feels like for immigrants, the, like to apply the concept of conditional love, like there isn't really any love, I would say, from this country to immigrants and for most marginalized populations. So I think it is interesting too to like tie the concept of like love to politics, because I think if a country valued and loved all of its people, there would not be so many rules and like there's just a lot more obstacles barring people from like basic access to things. That's all I got.
Oh no, go ahead, Bryn.
I was just saying I'm pulling up my notes that I took, but go ahead, Stephanie.
D, that is a really good point. I feel like with the word conditional and like just like that phrasing, you do think of like unconditional love and just like how that gets like thrown around a lot. And so seeing it like presented as conditional citizens, I feel like growing up, if like you guys do have like the like are able to like call yourselves or identify with like the term citizen, there's like an inherent like sense of like belonging that like is tied to it as well. And I feel like the juxtaposition of like the promises that come with citizenship by saying that they're conditional is like very I don't know, like it really makes you like think. And then like even going back to what the book connections from like earlier, like undocumented Americans already is like another like book title that like makes you like kind of like pause and wonder like why in your head like does like the term Americans being tied to like citizenship and just like belonging in the United States, like how that looks next to like undocumented, I feel like gives like a very similar effect. Also, Lauren did us the favor of adding a couple like other questions that might come up later on in the chat if that would also like inspire some thought.
I had the same quote written down. That's the like third question in there. I thought that was really good and I wanted to talk about that. If anyone's opposed, I'd love to talk about the like quote, conditional citizenship is characterized by the burden of having to educate white Americans about all the ways in which one is different from them. Where does the burden of education fall? And instead, where should it fall?
Do you have any thoughts on that one, like yourself, since that was the one who like that popped out for you the most?
Yes, I really liked this one because I felt like we have talked about this idea of like the burden of education in past Hardcover Hotties discussions. And I think it's a really interesting conversation because I feel like part of me is like, okay, you know, the burden shouldn't fall on like one person to educate other people about like even just like who they are or what their story is or their history, especially like in the book, you know, her being like, of course I have a knowledge of like American history, we learn it in schools, like that's just basic knowledge for me. Whereas, you know, I feel like it's a significantly rarer for an American, especially like a white American, to just know Morocco's history. But I feel like on the other hand, you know, it's something that I feel like takes an amount of initiation of discussing it for yourself in the first place to be able to pass that torch off to other people for them to also discuss it.
I was gonna say that that prompt reminded me of the like part of the book where she's talking about her French teacher who immigrated to Morocco, but yet like did not like assimilate to the culture there in any way. And that kind of exemplified how like she like was stating assimilation is about like power. So like how like Westerners don't have to necessarily assimilate to like more Eastern cultures, and not because like, I mean, there's not any like really logic for it if you think about it. Like, you know, that makes no sense because they demand Americans, like as a culture, as a society, like America will demand that like immigrants kind of like assimilate to that culture and remove any trace of like their like original culture. But I thought that was really interesting. Also, disclaimer, I didn't finish the book. Sadly, I only read half of it, but yeah, I think it does like intersect really well with past like discussions on the topic we've talked about, but I've definitely had experiences with like friends and just like peers where I am trying to find the line between like trying to explain something and kind of being like glad to, you know, like, I don't know, add to like someone's knowledge or if someone's asking, but at the same time creating boundaries for like how much I want to take on responsibility for being the educator, because ultimately I do think that it is like every individual's responsibility to educate themselves on some level now. Like I think that you can no longer kind of like claim ignorance or like inaccessibility to a lot of like information and resources that are out there. So like I would ideally like the public and like schools and institutions would be like educating people on like a wide variety of like intersectional topics like this, but or you know, just in some shape or form about like cultures and like history and narratives that have been like erased from like kind of the mainstream like public education system. But yeah, that was kind of a long-winded answer.
That's definitely true. I feel like for me, it made me think a lot of Year of the Tiger and how Alice Wong like it's evident in like all of her writing and like looking through any of like her website stuff, she understands like her position as an educator and what like Amy was saying, like everyone has the responsibility of being an educator, but I feel like there definitely is a limit to that where it goes from like taking on like the responsibility we all have and then it turning into like labor and like going beyond that. And she's someone who's like been very forward about getting paid for that labor. And like even I like the one thing like I really remember from one of the many things that I really remember from that book is like that one page where like the whole page just said like F you, pay me. Like that. And like then she like talked more about like education and how much like she's been expected to like educate people. And then I think back to this book and Layla talking about going to like a book panel discussion for one of her other books that's like very unrelated to all the topics that like were being brought up. But I think this was like early on in the book where she was asked to talk about ISIS. And I think like all of us here understand like how like why that just is like so inappropriate to like ask somebody who is like speaking about like an unrelated topic, but it's also way more like common than we think. And like we can, I feel like everyone here could also like identify situations where like you've had to like speak on a topic that you like would expect the other person to have like at this point taken some like initiative to like learn about it. But yeah, I feel like there always is, going back to the responsibility part, we can all trace back like a point when there have been more initiatives taken to like spread the word on different issues in like marginalized groups. And that's like a time period where I feel like a lot of people are able to take like large amounts of like responsibility. Like more recently we saw like so many people offering resources and all these things about during like the summer of the George Floyd protests. And then afterwards, I feel like hearing questions about that suddenly like was just an immediate example of like exhaustion and like labor being asked by others, especially like marginalized people. Because yeah, like once you've already been exposed like to like especially a situation where you have so many resources and then not use them, I feel like that's when like the line does get very, very blurred and like questionable and like what responsibility like we're all like taking on.
I feel like it's just so clear when someone's asking a question because they really want to hear your experience about it and get your opinion as somebody who's experienced it, versus asking something that's totally inappropriate for the situation or that's just completely unnecessary and could so easily be learned with various resources that are available.
I think too, somewhat like the ignorance with that question and like the inappropriateness, like it comes down to like laziness. Like this woman was not willing to do her end, because I think that's one thing that like maybe doesn't get as well communicated with education, is that like it takes two parts. It's like just like any relationship, it's like there's a give and there is a take. Like you have to come to the table like prepared to some extent, and I feel like obviously we can tie this to like neoliberalism and AI, all the like the immediacy of like information that's available, and that we just expect other people to like perform the role of like Google and like phones, and it's like that's not actually like people aren't libraries, and also not everybody is equipped to like have these discussions. So like there were a lot of times, especially like during that Floyd protest and stuff, where like people were like asking random Black people like their takes on the police and like different things like that, and like asking them to like create the solutions. And well, I'm sure there are quite a few Black people who have like imagined a different future for themselves in a different world. Like not everybody, like it just should not, the expectation and the burden should never have been on them, but people are like really lazy when it comes to trying to see the world from like different perspectives, I think.
Yeah, that reminded me of an experience like I had with a friend who like I was like at an Asian restaurant with her, like a Pan-Asian restaurant, and she kept asking me like what all the different ingredients were, and I was like, girl, like I don't even know, like Google it. But and I when like you were even talking about that in the beginning, I was thinking about how like I guess for her like it was out of convenience, you know, like it was more convenient to assume for her that like a person like of Asian descent, whatever, like would just know like in depth about a variety of like all other Asian cuisines, which like wasn't true, at least for me. But like I guess I mean I don't know like what went through her mind in that moment, but like I'm sure for her she's like, oh, it's like it's just more convenient if I just ask her. But like I kind of was like ticked off by that. I was like I don't know, it was just like a small moment where I was like, but like why did you ask me? Like why didn't you just Google it? Like I don't know. Like but yeah, that just made me think of that experience.
To kind of convolute the conversation a little bit, I guess, or to like kind of bring up something that I think is parallel to this, just because I've been studying it recently, so it's like on my mind when we had this conversation. I think it's really interesting how like we can say like a lot of what we're talking about here is basically self-education and education via somebody who has firsthand experience of something. And so what I've been learning about a lot about is like education is like learning from people who have firsthand experiences of things, and and other people talking for them about their experience. So I think it's important to bring into the conversation that and this exists within anything that's like news media or any type of like information that you're getting online. It can include an inherent bias that is similar, but like if you're talking to like there are a lot of people who, yes, ask those things that are inappropriate within a situation and assume things about other people's identities, and that's like not good. But if they're trying, but is it then the role of people who are not part of that group to talk on behalf of them, on behalf of the people about their experience, right? So is it my role now to go and educate like my grandmother, who's a Republican, and who, when she said something like racist about people coming over from the border, I see it as my obligation, or like, you know, to inform her about that. But then am I talking for other people? Am I expressing their experience? Because I think it's very important that we get people's firsthand experiences. And I think when we talk about this, like, that should be included within the conversation. I don't know.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Finn. One of the things that came to mind, I know a couple of people I know have like read this book. I don't know if you guys have Untamed by Glennon Doyle. In this book, the author brings up like an experience that she had, again following wait, is it? I think it was, yeah, I think it was following the George Floyd protests, where she, in an attempt to help and like not be a silent like white woman during the situation, started like a workshop where she was going to be like talking about like different issues like around race. And then she talked about like the reaction that she got from like her audience being like very upset about like her decision to do this. And I feel like there have been like many times in the past where like we've seen examples of that, and that is definitely where like I feel like the lines can be blurred. I like how you mentioned like a hypothetical of like a grandparent like saying something like, what do you do in that moment? And I personally like the route that like I've taken is taking like the knowledge base that like I do know, and trying to correct like whatever I can like in that moment, but then pointing to other resources, or like directly like sending or like taking that person like, sit down, this next week we're gonna sit down and watch a movie about like this topic, and like circle back to it, so that they can hear like directly from the source. Because I feel like there is like a huge difference of like somebody taking it upon themselves to sit down and for the greater good of like humanity, like writing out their own experience, or like speaking from what they know of like their like identity, for people to use as like a resource. And I feel like a lot of the times when someone takes the time to do that, yes, they're doing it to like educate like a large mass of people, but I feel like in hand it's like to show solidarity with like the group that you already belong to, and like lessen the burden on them, because nobody wants to be like explaining the same thing like 50 times. And yeah, I don't know, I don't have like an exact endpoint for that, but that was just like what you said reminded me of like the book, and personally that's like what I've done in like those situations.
So talking more about the book, I think one of the things that I learned most about was just all the different ways that so many people really do have conditional citizenship. And something I was really shocked by that I didn't know so much about was the checkpoints and how far they can be into the United States. And that really got me thinking that a lot of these, you know, laws that exist that do turn a lot of people's citizenship into something of like a conditional nature are not necessarily at the forefront of everybody's minds or at the forefront of the news or anything like that. And so I think as somebody who, you know, if you're not a part of that group that is getting marginalized or is already, it's kind of doesn't necessarily pop up on your radar to learn more about it. So I didn't know if anybody had any good resources that they have used to further educate themselves on citizenship in the US. And also if anyone had any thoughts on, you know, what knowledge should we as citizens seek out? I think that goes more off of the discussion that she had about the citizenship exam. And I feel like so many Americans who are born into their citizenship are a little bit removed from the knowledge that ought to come with being a citizen, and she talks about that. So I really to get you guys' opinions on that.
I also was really struck by the information about the checkpoints and how like literally 2/3 of the country, like people can just be stopped and like evaluated. And another thing that also occurred to me was the like, and I think that relates to it, is like the borders in the way that like she talked about specifically within, was it Morocco to Italy or was it Spain? I can't remember which Mediterranean country it was, but like the way that in order to like for only a couple of undocumented people to like cross the border, they would like rush it, and how like you used to just be able to walk across like even 50 years ago, but now there's like these like walls with like barbed wire, like it's all a lot more intense and like I don't know, it feels very American the way that the borders have been like exported. And obviously America's not the first person to come up with borders. Like the Great Wall of China did exist, the Berlin Wall existed, but the way that like, I don't know, the way that this like very aggressive protection of borders has been exported to a lot of countries that normally this was not the case for. And I think like a lot of it probably relates to, I think like the fear mongering with like news one, and like the risk of terrorism. Like I think that has been like incredibly like, I don't know, it's been a major reason for all of these like added restrictions that like make that dehumanize us more and more, because it's like, oh, there's a risk of this, and it's like, I don't know, it was just really, it's like alarming. And it's also like, how do we even stop it? Because it feels very inescapable. Like you can't even, it reminds me of, I watched this James Baldwin movie and how he had to move to France because he genuinely believed he was going to be assassinated in America. And I agree with him. He definitely would have been. And how like France, like it was a little bit of a break from America, but he was like, I can't escape it. Like I see it here. Like the way that the imperialism has like crept into so many different areas. And I think especially with all of our like war technologies and defense technologies, I think that's why the world is like looking and becoming more militant.
To jump in again, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. I just had a thought with that as well. But especially with like the use of like militant and yeah, bringing up like how much like the idea of like border check-ins is like definitely like very shocking, like when you're first encountering like just how deep it goes. But I think with what Dee was saying about like adopting like a militant role like that other countries are doing. I feel like it lets people, like regular citizens, like with the idea of like belonging to a place, also adopt like their own militant role, which is like what leads to like people feeling like it's taking it upon themselves to like question people's like belonging in like certain areas. So even like university students in their own university like taking a nap, which is like stories that I've seen like before. They could be like, oh, like who are you, why do you belong here, like do like who do you know here, like show me like an ID. And I feel like that's like a very not seen as like wildly aggressive as like a border check-in, like a border checkpoint, but carries like the same like tone and like threat, like immediate threat to like someone's safety, and like questioning of like their belonging, I feel.
Yeah, the way that like we police each other, and we are tools for surveillance for each other. Like not only is like the authority figures who are like employed by the government like checking up on people's citizenship, but like also regular people. Like when people go up, as she mentioned multiple times in the story, and was like, why aren't you speaking English? Like that's a way of policing people's citizenship, I think.
And also, it's really detrimental to the mental health of all of these people who are being questioned, because especially in a space like a university, I feel like, as a minority, it would definitely be significantly harder to get that sense of belonging in the place that you're at, or you're trying to like get a degree at, or wherever you're at, whether that's in the workplace or just in any space. And so then kind of like just the fact that you're like, okay, well, I don't belong here, kind of like creeping up, and then somebody's just questioning you all the time. The fact that other citizens, especially white Americans, have taken it upon themselves to be like this extension of border patrol, and like the whole like citizens arrest bullshit that we see sometimes over just stupid things. I just feel like that's just so insanely detrimental to the mental health of all of these people who get questioned all the time.
Okay, what I'm about to bring up, I feel like kind of you guys all just kind of touched on it, and Stephanie, you especially touched on it in your little message in the chat. But I was just gonna say, like, talk about what borders enforce and how borders enforce like a self and other, the in group and the out group, like Stephanie said. And then also bringing up, this is like back to one of our questions, with the concept of home and how that can be both like championed and weaponized by like the same groups, just based on like arbitrary things basically, and how that's like very harmful, and how borders enforce that like way of thinking. But yeah, I feel like those things all kind of lead into each other and lead into themselves. And then if you're like, in terms of people who are like surveilling other citizens and like think of themselves as like their own like policing force basically, like what that differentiation, like what that gives them, and what power that gives them. Yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought at the end there, but if anyone has any thoughts that go along with that, yeah.
Well, I think going along with what we were talking about of like, citizens questioning other citizens, I feel like she talked about the border being able to be moved, especially like with the checkpoints, but I feel like US government has been very successful in actually enacting that border in everyday life for everyone by like, just establishing this them versus us, and the us being anyone who isn't a white American. I think that then that border, it just becomes something that you're never able to get over, I feel.
This also reminds me of, that just reminded me of something, but kind of like how you were talking about how you never crossed the border, and those same people who, like the white Americans who are like doing that sort of thing, they're especially hypocritical in the sense, I feel like, that they will bring attention to it but then when any like good attention is brought to something, they'll be like, what? No. Like that just reminds me of how at my school during like the Black Lives Matter protesting, we had this like diversity class thing, which was good, I thought. And then like all these parents were like so mad, like bringing attention to it is racist. And it's just crazy because it makes no sense. It's like very hypocritical and like goes against other things that they say and just makes it weird and like worse.
Yeah, that's like a really, because also I feel like a lot of legislation that's really popular right now is like trying to get rid of critical race theory in schools. And also there was one bill that was proposed for OSU about like not something related to like not teaching about like Chinese culture. Like they don't want us to like, which again is like yellow scare, and like these people, this group of people is not citizens. In fact, more than not being citizens, they're an active threat to our democracy. But it's like literally my teacher, because we discussed this in class, and like OSU gets $1 billion from students who come from China to come and do school here. Like you're gonna try and shut down, like, because obviously this is clearly a money-making institution that we've all like endured, but the willingness of like these groups who probably aren't the ones getting the money from, I don't know, it's just the way that they're so willing and ready to shut down somebody who like groups who are not even a threat and are in fact like majorly benefiting the school. You think this school could run the way it's running without that $1 billion? Not a fucking chance. Like, but I'm sure there's people who are like working for the school who are advocates for this bill because again, it's like they see the other as like this major threat. I don't know.
I think just like in regards to the examples that both like Dee and Audrey brought up, it's like so clear how the language being used is like coded and like ignorant. Like when a lot of times like when people are making very like just disrespectful claims about like one's place within like a community, or like in attempts to like just get certain stories within like educational spaces, it's like they're often like these are often like excuses being made, or like an attempt to like save something like sacred to like just like American history, or like I don't know, like something weird about like just what it is to be like to belong to something. I feel like I'm not making sense, but I think that like it's for it's just very clear for like people who have actually like you can easily see through like how you can like people don't usually say what they mean, like because they're able to like recognize that like something may be wrong. Like I'm thinking about like just like banning books, or um like these attempts are blatantly like just like xenophobic or like racist, or like something of the sort, but like the people who are wielding like this kind of power and using it for like bad are able to recognize that that like isn't good, and that's why like they're using coded language, and like but aren't like brave enough to actually like be able to confront that and like to change it. And so I think like the conversation is often left like at very um in like very shallow places, and that's why like these arguments can be like very polarizing. Yeah.
I was gonna say, that like prompt about the other had me looking for this quote that I just now found, but I thought it really like conveyed, I don't know, like the answer to that question well. But so she's talking about like the wall in Melilla, like between Spain and Morocco, whatever. But she said, the wall instead has come to signify something deeper. It segregates Spaniards from Moroccans, Europeans from Africans, Christians from Muslims, and white people from brown or black people. The wall's message is clear and blunt: keep out. And I feel like the way that she like phrased that, like really like broke down like the rhetoric of like what it means to like have a border, just like even in the examples she was using, and like decoded that and was like, it's like a racist rhetoric, like fundamentally. So I thought like the way that she kind of explained how that othering occurs, like with that like physical boundary, I feel like that like answered it really well. But also this conversation, like from what Morgan was saying, reminded me of like a childhood memory I have that I just now uprooted, and it's a little bit traumatizing, so sorry to share this. But I remember I was probably like in elementary school, like playing in my, like in between my neighbor's yard and like my yard, like with my little sister, and my neighbor was like this really grumpy old dude, and he like came out and yelled at me and my little sister, and he was like get out of my yard before I throw you over the Great Wall of China. And like we just ran away because like we were kids, but like we were so deathly afraid of him after. And like I think I told I don't even know, I think we probably told my parents about it, and they were probably like, oh, just like stay away. But now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is like that grown ass man was yelling at us like little kids and saying that. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I had been my parents, I would have like gone over there and like beat his ass. Like, but like I don't know, like I don't really remember honestly like how my parents reacted, but like I'm sure in their minds it was kind of like I don't know, like they probably wanted to stay away from him and like, you know, just not like engage with that sort of even like whatever. But that was just like something I thought about, even like talking about walls and stuff, and I was like, I forgot about that memory. But yeah, that's a good example relating to what we're talking about. So
To go off of what you were saying, Amy and Morgan, with like the coded language, this literally just popped into my head because I was talking to my roommate about it like last week. But it reminded me of this incident that happened at Smith Steve my freshman year. Yes, shout out Smith Steve. This guy, he didn't live there. I also didn't live there. I just happened to be nosy. But he didn't live there, but I guess like, you know how like freshman year you meet like random people and you hang out with them from time to time. So he started hanging out with these people who were in like this certain scholars group in Smith Steve. And like I think he lived in like a place on North, but he would come over like all the time. And he would like I thought they were all friends. And then after a point, I think he just like started hanging out there like in the common room, like just like doing his work, like not bothering anybody. But then those like same people, I guess, like side-eyed him. And then like other like people on the floor were like, oh, who is this? He doesn't belong here. Mind you, he had his laptop and his books out, so he was obviously a student. But he was like, oh, he doesn't belong here. Like he's creeping me out. Like he's weird. Like we need to like call the RA and like get him like thrown out of the building. And they tried to do just that. And basically they were like, oh, this is a very sketchy guy who they actually invited over. But that's actually very important. But they were like, oh, he's very sketchy, like he's not supposed to be here, he doesn't belong here. And so like we need to find a way to like get him kicked out of Smith Steve. And like I think just like using the language of like people being like different, weird, alien, like not, even though he very much had the right. Like if you think about like freshman year, we were all able to like swipe into different dorms and like have access to those places at the time too, just to like study because we were students and stuff. And then things changed during COVID, but like to like kind of like create a border of the important thing was that the students saying that he was weird and stuff, they were all white students and that he was Black. Um, and so it was interesting that they said that he was like strange and like weird and that he was shady, when there were several other random students from different floors in different dorms who always sat in that like common area as well. But of course they chose him. It also didn't help that the person who was the loudest person saying that he needed to be thrown out and that he was shady was a moral scholar. And yes, was a moral scholar. And she was the main one, like talking about like, oh, we need to, like, this is like, he's very weird, he's very like odd and stuff. But then like she would also like turn around and preach about like, oh, diversity and inclusion and stuff like that, which is very interesting. So sometimes you have to, I will say her name. I will. It's a safe space. Her name is Jordan, but I don't remember her last name. And I saw her at the ODI graduation. And I just looked at her and I was like, okay, all right. All right. But yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm
Oh, go ahead, Deborah.
Oh, I would after that whole tangent, I just want to say that like using like language like that to say like people are weird and shady and stuff like that and creating that border, that people essentially, like in the way Morgan said, like people know what they're doing, but they want to try and use like, I don't know, what's the word, euphemisms to like make it seem like it's not as bad as what it really is.
It's always a security concern and not like just blatant racism. It's like the ability to like kind of encode that in like a security concern, which I feel like it's a lot of what the border and like policing the border allows you to do, because it's like, oh, it's a safety concern, it's a security concern, we're protecting people. And that's always the language that's used. And like, from protecting from who? Other people? Like, it's just ridiculous. But I do feel like, yes, exactly what Stephanie's saying in the chat. Exactly that. Just that like language of immigration, you can get to hear it so much on the news, and I just feel like it gives people like the rhetoric, the script, exactly what to say to be able to like weaponize what it means to be an American and what it means to be a citizen, to just be racist and exclusionary.
Yeah, I added in that question from like the earlier like big bunch that we sent, just because I thought that a lot of what we were saying like aligns with that. But going back to some of the points that were made earlier, definitely language is like a key thing, which we've seen. And even with what like Amy was talking about with like the wall is like such an intentional, like it went from like the border and like the border fence to build a wall, like how adding like these like key terms can like shift like the viewpoint. But it's also very interesting to like see the part that says like voicing support or like objection with issues like around like citizenship and just like how we support like immigrant groups. I feel like a lot of the times there are like moments where people try to defend these groups in a way that like is still I guess I could call like misinformed. So like maybe like assigning like immigrants to like value based on like their labor, and being like, oh, like I know it's like a joke that like we've referenced like in groups of friends in the past, but like even like Kelly Osbourne like on literally like national TV being like, if Donald Trump deports all Mexicans, like who's going to clean your toilet? And like she really thought she was like helping people, and then everyone was like, oh my god, why did you say that? And it is a moment of like, why, what connections are you making, like even in your like support if that is like the true intention, like what connections like are you making that like lead you to think that, or like base like somebody's like value off of like roles that like already benefit like or enforce like hierarchies. And that's like very interesting. And also the whole like being very vocal about maybe like large like businesses or people that like hold a lot of lots of stakes and like the issue who like are very like negative in their regard of like immigrants, but then using the same people like in their businesses but keeping that part of it like silent because it's like an area where they can like benefit in but not vocally like support. So that's just very like a really like large contradiction, I feel. So
I have something to add to that point based on a reading that I did in one of my classes, specifically talking about like the tech industry, and how immigration like plays a role in that, and specifically in terms of labor. But I'm trying to find the reading and the specific quote. So I will be back in 1 second with that.
And going off more of the question that Stephanie added into the chat, I feel like the popularization of this type of language just makes it easier to pass any types of policy that put these racist thoughts and exclusionary thoughts into law and policy, because, you know, it's just wrapped up in that language of protection or, you know, all of this type of stuff that we've been talking about. I think it just makes it that much easier to pass it without anybody questioning it at all. And like also made me think about like when she was talking about the Muslim ban, the Muslim travel ban, and how like Trump's lawyers were able to spin it in a way that like it couldn't be like said as like just a blatant Muslim ban when like that's obviously what it was. And I think that type of stuff is really interesting to look at, because even the way that she was saying that it was changed around to be able to get passed, to me still sounded very much like something that could be challenged legally. And so I feel like, you know, it's interesting to think about what little, like, I don't know, barrier there is to be able to pass stuff like that, even though we think like, oh, you know, you can't just like pass laws that are like straight up wrong or stuff like that. I feel like, you know, it just happens so much, and it really made me want to look more into policy and stuff like that. Lauren, did you find the reading?
Okay, I found the reading, looking for the specific quote because it's a long one. So feel free to continue discussion, and I will be back when I find it.
I wanted to circle back. What type of knowledge do you guys think is something that should be considered standard knowledge for citizens in the US?
I'm glad that you brought this up again, because I've been actually thinking about it for a while and had a question written in the chat, but I haven't sent it. but I think like it's a really interesting like just to like add stuff onto your question that you've posed. Like I think um I I had like a I took a class this semester that dealt with like philosophy of education, race, and citizenship. So I've been like coming back to like the role of education and like preparing people for like a proper civic education, but like things to think about, like what exactly makes a good citizen, and like how do we like create what I guess would constitute such a civic education that factors in like the plurality of both American citizenship and immigrant experiences. I think that Layla does a really great job of like focusing on like the um that like citizenship and like immigrant experience is like inherently pluralistic. Like it can't be like homogenized into like one story. And so like how is would like a good civic education be like a concrete education of like diverse histories and like diverse stories, or is it something more fundamental that arms students with like the ability to like be curious about like these different like diverse perspectives and to like seek out like different learning experiences? Because I think that like a lot can be said for either um argument, and like when um Stephanie was talking about like how some like efforts for like advocacy can be sometimes misdirected or like even misused, like in like how you and like reducing like groups of people to like their role like within like our community, I guess. Like I think that um one thing that like came up a lot in like the class that I took that was like really interesting to me was like how um like I guess what we were talking about earlier with like where does the burden of education lie, and like how does like exposing like young people or even children to like diverse groups of people like enable them. Like I think that like a lot of a huge argument for like efforts to especially like white and like um middle to upper class like students who are like um uh or children, like a huge argument for like them on like from their parents is like that they want to expose their children to diverse perspectives to like enable them to like um communicate with or to interact with like diverse groups of people like throughout their life. But I think that sort of like rhetoric can reduce marginalized people to like educational resources. So like in that sort of scenario, how do we also like ensure trust and safety like for all children, like when exposing them to like a good like civic education? There was a lot there. Um, but I think that like, yeah. Basically the other things that the things that I added that I added on were like how does like a good civic education, like how can we factor in like plurality? And I think another thing to think about would be like that safety and like trust piece when in like educational spaces.
So I found it. Basically this whole article is talking about cyber typing, which is like the author Lisa Nakamura talks about how basically the way that the internet is structured and the digital world is structured reproduces systems of oppression that are already in place, like in our day-to-day lives, but they're just like being reproduced on the internet and on the way that like different like people stereotype others on the internet and like the ways that this works. And this was like, I think she wrote this in the early days of the internet, when things were like still being like figured out and developed, and like how everything was working and how the internet was working as like a digital community basically. But she applies the concept of cyber typing, and she calls I guess a real life example of cyber typing or cyber typing in action as like the experience of South Asian immigrants as like a natural resource in terms of like tech development in Silicon Valley, and how like problematic it is, and how it's like reproducing those same ideas again, but in a new system, which at that time was the internet, and still like in real life and on the internet. So she just basically says, the characterization of Asians as being superior workers because of their inherent near physiological differences, seeing them as impervious to pain, places them, because she also brought up the example of Chinese railroad workers, and like the racist idea that they were thought to have nerves further away from the skin, which is obviously like not true. But she says it places them squarely in new digital different caste, the outcasts of Silicon Valley. This phrase reproduces the old language of caste, an ancient system which preserves hierarchical distributions of privilege and oppression. So I think that this example kind of shows like the power of language again, and it shows like, and I think what a big takeaway from this book was, like for me, and I think for a lot of people too, I hope, was the ways that she reveals like these structures are everywhere and they're in so many different systems, and the way that they all overlap. And this example just proves that like that logic is true in other cases too. And I think it points to like how important this book is, and her like methodology and the way that she handles this can like open up similar conversations in other like spheres that she didn't even like bring up yet, because this brings up like labor and the internet, which are two totally other, like not totally other topics, but they weren't like specifically relevant to this book. But I think it works to show how important it is.
Lauren, this reminds me of like another example that I wrote a discussion post about a while ago, but I found this article about how like OpenAI, which like produces or which made ChatGPT, like used Kenyan workers to like screen like really disturbing like content basically, and they were paid like less than $2 an hour basically to make ChatGPT less toxic. But like in the end they actually had to cut ties with the African company. I think that was like basically they were like outsourcing that labor because like the workers were having like serious like mental health effects from literally like absorbing all that negative content just so they could make like this like artificial intelligence like, I don't know, like safer for human use, which is like crazy. And it like dives into the same ethical questions that like Lauren's example also brought up, like enforcing that like system, and further like, I don't know, even dividing that like gap between like who is benefiting the most from like technology, and like as it kind of like further grows and becomes more advanced, versus like who is actually the face of the labor that like no one questions basically, and like everyone uses it. So it's like, that's like definitely a whole other like question. It's like technology and like labor and everything. So yeah, definitely a very important emerging issue. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah.
I think you guys both tied in like two things that I wanted to mention. So like I recently listened to an episode of the Forbidden Fruits podcast, and they interview Grimes, and Grimes calls herself a like AI spy or something, like she's spying on the intel world. Honestly, it was kind of giving white supremacy, but a lot that like came to my mind is like, obviously these are white dominated spaces. When we think Silicon Valley, we think like white guys and like furries, or at least I do. And how how many sociologists are in the room when they're developing the AI? How many like people of color are in the room when they're developing the AI? Like there's so much that's getting put into this like consciousness that is being like built that isn't actual like reflective of like the range of human experiences. It's only being like relegated to like white male experiences. And also I think it reminds me too of like, and connect this back to the book, the way that like AI is starting to be used as like border patrol and like surveillance of citizens, and how there's certain AI that doesn't recognize like Black faces as humans because the coders who put it in didn't code for like what Black people look like, and which honestly is a benefit to Black people, but I think they have remedied that. And I'm like very nervous, especially as the NYPD, I saw an article, they're starting to use like robots like by Boston Dynamics or whoever that company is to like do policing, and just how like this is gonna like, so even if we develop this consciousness that we're probably gonna use, we're gonna model the discrimination we use against like people of color and other marginalized groups against, that when it becomes powerful enough is probably going to do the exact same thing to us. Like after it'll, like I'm worried it's going to become a tool to eliminate and control, not completely eliminate, obviously, because like the world would not, like you can't exploit anybody if you don't have the exploited. So they want to keep them around naturally, but like the ways that like robots are going to be the ones to enforce that, and they're not even going to recognize like, and it's not going to matter because again, it's like AI, like they don't care about humans because they're not, I don't know. I'm just like very worried for how the way that all these things are going to be like applied in real time for like defensing and patrolling like countries, borders, yada yada.
Originally, sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, I'm looking to send the article now. I see the request in the chat. I have it as a PDF with my notes on it. So I'm going to try and save a version without. I'll send it in a second. But basically to Dee's point, like a lot of the, pretty much all of like the, well, I can't really say that, but I don't know. So much of the AI development and like stuff like that is so problematic because there's like people with biases and like they're not going into it with the right like ideologies, and like that gets reproduced in like these structures which are then used to like inflict real harm upon like real people, and it's so messed up, and it's like super problematic, obviously, because once those structures are in place, like they're so hard to stop, and the internet and surveillance is making it so much worse. And that example is like literally true of AI not being able to recognize Black faces, and it's like literally been detrimental to, there's individual like cases obviously, but and they have like worked on it, but at the end of the day it's like a lot of it comes down to like data sets for AI and things like that, and it's like what you're putting in the data set and how you're putting it in, and like a lot of the technologies are predictive too. So if you're putting in a certain data set that like has bias within it, if you're going historically, it does, it's just gonna keep like the way that the AI works, the program works, it's just gonna like keep using that, and then you're putting it into action with like real life people, like in real scenarios, and it will cause like real harm, which is so messed up. But yeah, that's all I had to add. So Bryn, you can go ahead.
That's a very good point, Lauren. I recently was in a class, it was aviation and human factors and safety, and it was a really interesting class, and we focused a lot towards the end on automation in aviation, which has been just like increasing so rapidly because new technology comes out all the time. Aviation is so well funded, there's always new stuff coming out, and a lot of automation centers around, safety. So like reducing workload in the cockpit and, enhancing like technologies that allow pilots to better see and maintain separation from other aircraft, and, kind of like fail safes of like not letting you do things that are going to cause a crash, and a lot of like collision avoidance. And it's really interesting because especially after COVID happened, there's like a huge pilot shortage. A lot of pilots retired during COVID, and there was already a shortage ahead of that. A lot of people talk about single pilot operations. So right now you have to have at least 2 pilots in the cockpit for flights that are Part 121, basically like any airline flight. And a lot of people are talking about like, oh, let's just put 1 person there. Like, do we really need 2? Like, automation is so good. And the part about this conversation that we were having about automation that I feels like relates is we talked so much about the difference between humans versus computers, and humans are or computers are very literal minded, so they do not respond to their environment. They just simply respond how they're coded. And that has led to many crashes in aviation because computers are literal minded. And they also aren't autonomous systems. There is no such thing as an autonomous system when it comes to computers, because they're ultimately all programmed by humans, maintained by humans, and monitored by humans. And it was just really interesting to kind of think about that. We thought about it a lot, obviously, just as applied to aviation, but I think it really comes into play a lot when we talk about automation in terms of like using AI, like you said, AI, the NYPD using AI, or like any type of thing like that, where there's just like an extreme addition of automation into a field. I feel like there's a lot to consider and think about, because I feel like computers are an extension of humans rather than like a separate thing, because they're all created by humans. And so I think that you just have to remember that they're not fully autonomous, and there is human input into every single interaction that an AI instance has. And I think it's just going to be really interesting to watch as we like grow older, to see where AI is put and where things get automated. Honestly, I have a lot of hope after looking at the aviation side of things, because, computers can't do everything. They're not going to be able to do everything. No system is autonomous like that, and they're just not going to be able to make it like that. So I think that, as much as I feel like I'm nervous about where AI is going to be implemented, I ultimately feel like, it's not like a computer's taking over the world scenario, and it's more like, what type of reach will humanity be able to gain from AI? So that was really long. I had a lot to say there.
Just one last thing to, I guess, wrap the AI conversation up. I feel like it gets brought up literally all the time, but it's just everywhere now. But a lot of the models are also literally language driven. So it's like, as this book pointed out, language is so important. And when that's like the main factor that these like programs are working based on, that's like how they know what to do. And that's literally how they work. Obviously, the language that you put in is very important. So yeah, that's just a little tidbit, I guess.
I know that Laura just said branching off of that, like wrapping it up, but I had something very quick that I wanted to talk about that kind of goes off of AI, but ties in a bit with like what Morgan's like book rec of The Invisible Woman, and just like statistics and how like data is like being used to like organize like people at this point. I know this was like a topic that was brought up in the book where Laila was talking about how Arab Americans were classified, and she was talking about like her position as like a fair like skinned woman having to put like I think she just put like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she just put like white. And then after I remember her talking about how she talked to a Black Arab American, and they were also like, yeah, I was basically forced to put white because that was what it was like listed under. And I've definitely heard a lot of debate about that. And another thing that was yeah, so finishing that she put black and white, and it does like make you question like what we were talking about before, like language and like the importance of it, and like categorizing this information and like the impact that it has, because a lot of the times this is directly impacting like funding and like the stats that they want to like show all of like the US, and like show that white people are still the majority, to like lessen like the fear mongering and like that aspect. But something that was like maybe a more recent event that like I think you guys might be able to like reference back to is the citizenship question on the census. And I remember a while back when I was still on Twitter and following like a lot of people that were like organizers in like the undocumented community, were talking about how risky the language around like the citizenship question was, and like adding that question to the census, are you a citizen, yes or no, can stop like millions of people who think that by answering that question they're putting their own lives or their family lives like at risk. And that's like valuable information, and a whole group that isn't being like represented on the census, which is like used for so many things. But people were like saying like, oh, a lot of people won't understand that if you put no, I'm not a citizen, it falls under like people who are here like on work visas, people who have their green cards, people who like different categorizations that just like don't belong to the term like citizenship. But it's very intentional. Like they know that they can't like get anybody based off of that question, but they know even more that that's a question that would like make people who that would like negatively affect like fearful for their position in the country, like at their core, and like stop from like responding to like the rest of the census. So that's another way that like language and like what Bern was saying, like the human aspect of it, when it is just all very like organizational, like putting categories, like no, like humans are behind it, and like very much like adding in like their own input and their own like biases in it. And something else that I keep like almost in every single comment, my mind like circles back to this, but for what we were previously talking about, graduation, we had the commencement speaker Brian Stevenson come in, author of Just Mercy, and he talked a lot about just different things that we've talked about too, like hope and like keeping hope in like different situations. But one of the salient things from like his speech was policymakers. He like said something about how policymakers have all this power and are putting out like have such a big say and like stake in like different issues, but are not in any conversation with the people directly affected by these issues. So of course that is going to affect like the language, the biases, and like the things that like everyone is going to be like using and like directly like affected by. So yeah, that is just like different places where I feel like that would apply to.
And I want to circle back to Morgan's point a little while ago about what you said would make like a good like civic education, and kind of just what knowledge does like it take to be a citizen, and what should be kind of expected and what not. And I feel like from our conversation, to me, I think that citizenship, kind of the way that Laila Lalami was talking about it, is a responsibility. And I feel like you know, kind of like that idea of you can take your citizenship and say, okay, what does this mean to me? How can I expand my knowledge on what it means to be a citizen? And how can I further help this country that I'm a citizen of? And what can I do? And I think for me, that's what I think about after reading this book and what it would mean to be a citizen. I feel like that's not necessarily like, that's what I think about when you guys are talking about it.
I really like that, Bran. I think that like taking responsibility for one's own like education and like the types of like just like your learning like experience is not like something that's passive. And it should be like you should be like actively working to like broaden your the things that you're learning about and like that takes work, and obviously like we've seen that like like educational institutions can often like not offer us like a um complete and holistic like civic education that would like arm us with the ability to like do all things. And then I think it like reminded me of like another reading that I had done that like defined it like posed the question of like what at what point does like culpability arise, like what at what point should we like start to like, and then also like what does accountability look like, I think is like a really important thing when it comes to like um civic education. But this particular author, I'm trying to think of which reading it was, but she's defined culpability as like, or like a an action is like culpable at the point when this person is in a position to know better. And so I think that like that is a really like important thing to like keep in mind, like what does ignorance like truly look like when like you're, especially for like, at least for me, like when I'm just constantly surrounded by like opportunities to like know better and like know more, like what does ignorance like really look like. So I think that like that is an important thing to keep in mind also when we think about like, yeah, like when like what would a civic education look like that would put everyone in a position to like always know better, and like how can we, yeah, I don't know.
Does anyone have examples of what other countries do in terms of like civic education? I don't know, Morgan, if you learned about this in your class.
I actually did not. We are my class was like really limited to the US. And but I think that's interesting. I am not really sure what it looks like elsewhere. I think a lot of that would likely I think that there are a lot of like things that inform that also, like what citizenship looks like, elsewhere would inform what like an education for like that specific um um preparedness for like that particular like civic environment would look like. But I think that's like an interesting thing to like look into, and like um I would be willing to like look into it, and if I find anything. But if anybody else has any thing, please jump in.
Real quickly, I wanted to add in a link to the Hardcover Hotties knowledge bank, where we've like added whenever like we find like free PDFs of stuff, we've like tried to add that in there. And another book that is in the knowledge bank right now is Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. I found it like a super like enriching book about like race relations, and I feel like it does like a really good job of like characterizing it like throughout like a wide range of like marginalized identities. And also she does like get into like specifics of like racialization like in like academia, which is like kind of similar to what we were just talking about too. So feel free to check out that doc. We're working on like adding in like a couple more. So yeah, and I also invite everybody to maybe like reflect on some like final thoughts or like questions that we had for the group that we can like share before we start like wrapping up and talking about our summer and next month.
I had a little thought about, I think Morgan was talking about like education. Now I watched this video about code switching and how education acts as like kind of cultural imperialism, like it reproduces the systems of oppression of the dominant culture. So like the idea of standard English is kind of like a synthetic thing that is based off, I think, like middle and upper class white English people. So like a good education would like integrate that and also how people actually speak, which is in the US, we use the example of like AAV, right? And so Oakland School recognized AAV as like an actual dialect and they started teaching with it. And that's like using standard English and AAV as like dialectically opposed from one another. And there's this idea called code meshing, which is where you like kind of mix them, but it hasn't actually been done yet. But I think that's kind of like closer to an ideal of where like an education that prepares you. Because I feel like education, if it's really true to itself, I feel like this is why you have to self-direct it, but it should kind of allow you to orient yourself against society in some ways. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I just dropped it in the chat, but if you like have the link to that video, definitely like share it so we can plug it like on the Instagram and everything. But I really like how I wanted to like note that you did use like the term ideal when referring to like these like types of education, and I think it's important that we like characterize like recognize when we are like striving for like an ideal thing, because and like being able to recognize like at what point like are the things that we're striving for like feasible like in the world that we live in, and then also like how like what the importance of like thinking of ideal solutions, or recognizing like the importance and necessity of like imagining like ideal worlds. Like I think these types of conversations are like really important, and like recognizing that like what we live in is not ideal, but like striving for something that like could be that, and using that type of terminology when we like speak on this is important. Guys, I don't know if I'm making sense.
You are making sense. You're making very good points, and I like hearing them.
Thank you for the affirmation, friend. Thank you. We are coming up on 7 p.m. So if anybody has like any lasting thoughts, media recommendations, or like discussion questions that like we weren't able to touch on, like definitely drop them in the chat, or you can DM us like on the Instagram after the meeting. But I feel if everyone's okay with that, now would be a good time to wrap things up and discuss May Book of the Month. Is that good? Okay. So happy Asian American Pacific Islander Month. Woo, happy May, yay. What could we possibly be reading this month? That's what you're wondering. I would love a bit of a drum roll. Get ready, hardcover hotties, to immerse yourself in the fantastical world of Junji Ito. This month, we are going to be reading Gyo, which is a series of short stories. We're going to be coming back to the graphic novel, manga, What a World. And this, I believe, is our first experience as a group with horror. I think that this is really, oh no.
Oh wait, Her Body and Other Parties scared me personally.
Oh, true. That was a scary book. So never mind. But yeah, there are a few, I think, yeah, this is like a series of like short stories. It's a relatively like, I feel like it's a good length. I think it was about, yeah, I'll type it in the chat. Yo, not Jim, Yo by Junji Ito. It's roughly like 400 pages, I believe. There are 2 parts to it, but we're only like going to be doing the first one. But if you find yourself like loving number 1 and wanting to read number 2, that's totally okay. Yo can be like accessed by some, like the PDF can be accessed by like some libraries. So if you have like Overdrive or Libby, like definitely check that out. And then also if anybody like is able to find like a free PDF version, as always, like send it over our way. We do so the meeting will be held on the first Sunday of June, which is June 4th. We have some very exciting news about meeting location, and yeah, mostly illustrations. The book is so it can be like a pretty quick read, but yeah, very exciting news about meeting location. And so stay tuned for that. We're waiting to hear back from some people. But yeah, when we'll let y'all know all of the details when we post the meeting, like the book announcement within the next few days, but definitely like get started reading if you are willing and able. And just like a heads up, like some of the imagery, if you have like read Junji Ito before, some of the imagery can be like pretty gory or disturbing. So like keep that in mind, and like definitely don't like push yourself, and like know your limits when dealing with horror and the likes. Yeah, did I miss anything, friends?
Thank you guys for coming. This has been so fun. We're so excited for summer and to dedicate so much more time to a bunch of different content for you guys. We're so excited, and we hope that you're ready for the ride. And congrats to all those who have graduated. Yay. Sorry, Bren, I also saw you unmute earlier, so if you had a comment, please.
I was just gonna say that I'm really, really, really excited for summer book club because I was really nervous that you were about to say that we weren't gonna have summer club. I got really scared. I can't wait to read the book. I'm very excited.
Quite the opposite, actually. Hardcover Hotties is up. Hardcover Hotties is, yeah, doing big things this summer.
Thank you, everybody who came. We hate to see you go, but we love to watch you leave. Respectfully. Yes. Have a good day, everybody. See you next month. Look for updates on our Instagram.
Bye, thank you.